Prisoners of Geography, 10 Maps That Explain Everything About the World by Tim Marshall. A New York Times bestseller book, the author Tim Marshall is a British journalist, author, and broadcaster that specialized in foreign affairs and international diplomacy. He authored books on geopolitics, often exploring how geography influenced global politics and power. Published in 2015, the title meaning Prisoner of Geography, to me at least, means that the country's geography can limit the capabilities and limitations for the people, often far greater than what we know. He uses 10 maps and covers each of their geopolitical situation. All the chapters orders from Russia all the way down to the Arctic. And it's a good balance of 22 to 29 pages, what makes it a good balance. Now to the chapter of United States. Tim Marshall explains the natural borders. The country is geographically protected on both coasts, bordered by the Atlantic Ocean to the east and Pacific to the west. In the east, the Appalachian Mountains stretch from Canada down to Alabama, while the Rocky Mountains in the west running down from Canada to New Mexico. To the north, the Great Lakes serves as natural barriers, while Mexico forms as the southern border. These geographic features have historically provided the United States with significant protection from foreign invasion. Unlike many African countries where border conflicts are common, the U.S. had not had any contempt or with constraints or invasions from neighboring countries. Border disputes and tensions are a frequent source of conflicts in other parts of the world, but the natural borders of the United States have contributed to its relative security and stability. With this, the United States has been able to focus inward, developing and strengthening the nation without the constant threat of land invasions. And having both oceans, the U.S. has recognized early on strategic importance of the naval power. Now, understanding any potential threats will likely come by sea, the country invested heavily in building one of the most powerful naval forces in the world. But we have to ask ourselves, how did the United States reach this point? And Tim Marshall, in this book, briefly explores the historical and geopolitical events that shaped the United States into the global power it is today in 2025. Starting with the Europeans first arriving in the early 17th century, realizing the East Coast is of virgin territory, and how they will later use the Native American trails to explore much of the continent, reaching them to like the Mississippi River and far west. Now, fast forward to July of 1776, the Declaration of Independence was signed, which started a new movement to the United States, and this is the beginning of their expansion. In 1803, the United States purchased Louisiana Territory from France. With this, the United States now had full control of the Mississippi River and the basin. In 1819, the Transcontinental Treaty was signed, with the Spanish accepting that the U.S. would have jurisdictions in the far west above the 42nd parallel, which is now today California and Oregon. Now having full control of the West and the Pacific Ocean now. In that same year, in 1819, the Spanish ceded Florida to the United States. In 1867, Russia sold Alaska to the United States, paying $7.2 million or like 2 cents an acre, with U.S. hitting gold there in 1896. As you can see, over time, the United States gradually expanded its territory, which played a major role in building its wealth and influence. This is just a brief overview of the geopolitical events Tim Marshall discussed in his book. Now to the chapter of Africa. A quote from this chapter is, "The world idea of African geography is flawed." And that is true. The early maps, particularly the Mercator projection map, which became the standard map in like the 18th century, depicted Africa as much more smaller than it actually is. The map of Africa appeared to be about the same size as South America, even having Greenland and Antarctica look bigger than Africa. Now, throughout the book, Tim repeatedly highlights the true scale of Africa, emphasizing the vastness of the continent. And it wasn't until the 1970s when Arnold Peters, a German historian, proposed the Peters projection map, which reflects the actual size of the land masses, but this also has some flaws to it when using the map for navigation. I'll place an image of the two maps here. Now, I often use this example to people to better help them understand how big Africa really is. Now, if you would drive from Alexandria, Egypt to Khartoum, Sudan, that will cover about 2,300 kilometers. Longer than the distance from St. Paul, Minnesota to Austin, Texas, which is about just under 1,800 kilometers. Now, due to how big Africa is and how diverse the geography is in this book, Tim Marshall splits the Africa into thirds when speaking about the geopolitics. The first third begins on the Mediterranean coastline to the bottom of the Sahara Desert, the world's largest dry desert, ending in the Sahel region. These are more of the North African Arabic countries. The second third is the sub-Saharan African region around the equator, also known as the Central Belt of Africa. I'll have a link on the map below. This is like a much more diverse region with rainforests, jungles, and mountains. Mountains being the biggest factor, making it very hard to navigate throughout Africa. Now, when reading the chapter of United States, Tim Marshall emphasizes the importance of the United States river system being good for navigation and trade. But this is not the case for Africa. In the United States, the lands are much more flat. In Africa, for the elevation goes up, especially in that sub-Saharan region, and it makes it very hard to do trade. Africa has great coastlines, but are terrible for natural harbors. And for the rivers are so difficult to transport, there are waterfalls every few miles, with the rivers having much of a rapid flow. But with the advance of technology, they are better able to use these rivers for trade. One example is the Nile River. It has two main sources that merge into one single river, connecting in Khartoum, Sudan. Blue Nile originates in Lake Tana in Ethiopia. Lake Tana is on top of a mountain, also known as the Ethiopian Highlands. The elevation is about like 17,000 meters, slightly bigger than the elevation in Denver. Now, during the monsoon season, it experienced the heaviest rainfall in this period. Water will come rushing down the Nile, traveling north, eventually flooding the region around it, reaching to the Mediterranean Sea. Now, you may have heard Ethiopia sometimes being called Africa's water tower. Now, the White Nile originates in Lake Victoria, the largest lake in Africa. Just like the Blue Nile, it flows north through the elevation of the Lake Victoria, but it has more of a steady flow. But important to mention is that the Nile River flows through 11 countries, with the Blue Nile traveling through 3 of them, Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt. And in this chapter, Tim Marshall explains the geopolitical events between the countries when controlling the Nile and with these hydroelectric projects. But going deeper into the chapter, he details the natural abundance of the resource of the countries in sub-Saharan Africa. Particularly wanted to talk about as DRC. Being the second biggest country in Africa that's located in the equator, here you will find a very diverse geography. To the north, there's tropical rainforests. To the south, there are more grasslands. To the east, you have like lakes, mountains, and active volcanoes. And to the west, there's more like lowlands, rainforests, and savannas. With this, DRC has great natural resource of cobalt, copper, and like diamonds. Tim Marshall points out the troubling history of the Europeans left on DRC, the horrendous acts of King Leopold II of Belgium, and how the Berlin Conference meeting between the European leaders to colonize Africa. A quote from this chapter: back in the capitals of London, Paris, and Brussels, and Lisbon, the Europeans took maps of the contours of Africa geography and drew lines on them. Or to take a more aggressive approach, lies. With this, DRC borders 9 different countries, the most in Africa, pretty much having constant border conflicts with each of those countries. Now, heading west to Nigeria, Africa's most populated country and largest oil producer. The nation is rich crude oil but faces internal problems. In the northern region, the Boko Haram insurgency has caused significant conflicts with the ultimate hindering the development of Nigeria. Now, heading south to the bottom third of Africa, starting from like Angola, Zambia, and Mozambique to the bottom countries below. The geopolitical situation in the southern part of Africa is just as bad as the countries in the north. But to talk briefly about South Africa, Tim Marshall explains why South Africa geography is the best for trade, being at the southernmost part of Africa, having access to the Atlantic Ocean and to the Indian Ocean, with abundance of gold, diamond, magnesium. With this, South Africa tops all the African countries as being the largest trading partner to China to this day. Tim Marshall goes deeply with the relationship with China and these African countries. Another quote from this chapter is, all Chinese want is oil, minerals, and the precious metals in the markets. Now, my final thought in this book is that you will learn a brief history of geography and the country geopolitical events, and all blended together in a kind of a compacted in this book. The writing style is clear and straightforward. Tim Marshall is a journalist, and when reading this book, you feel like you're being reported with information. It's like a fact-focused book. Published in 2015, so a lot has changed since then, the 10 years from now, but it's a good overview of geopolitical events. This is a great book for anyone who is looking to learn about geopolitics situation, about the world we live in. I have lent this book to numerous of friends and they all gave positive feedbacks. For me, this book made me realize no matter how advanced our technology becomes, a country geography will always be a dominant force in shaping the future. Please let me know in the comments below if you have read this book and what you learned about it, or if you plan on reading it. To support your channel, Hit the like, subscribe, and check out the links below. Till next time.